Thank you so much for doing this with us, joining Malaimare from far away, coming
Thanks
over.
for having me.
Totally. So basically what we're talking about, the light talks here and the recording here is all about your vision and your approach to lighting and visual storytelling and where that came from. So, I mean, obviously we've seen all of your work and with the body of your work, is there anything that that you ground back to, something where you have the feeling the way you approach lighting, the way you feel things? Is there anything there where you have the feeling it goes through?
It is. I mean, if I remember correctly, I think I was probably 7 or 8 years old when my parents took me to a very strange movie that was Tarkovsky's The Stalker. And of course, I had no idea what I was seeing. I didn't understand anything about it, but it was an amazing experience because I remember there were a few images like the room filled with sand and just water falling. Those two images like stayed with me for so long, and like later when I was in the film school and I rewatched the movie again, I was like, oh yeah, okay, that's why I remember for so long. It was very interesting how like an image can communicate so much and it can stay with you for so long. The other moment that I think that kind of made me decide to be a cinematographer. My father is an actor, and he's a theater actor and a director as well. So he had a play. It was Gogol's Overcoat, and he was done with almost no words, but he had 180 light changes, and I realized like you can do so much with light, even in a contained space like a small stage, and you can express so much with the light. And that was another moment that kind of made me think like that can be interesting to work with light and, and create something with light.
It's interesting. How old were you when you saw the Tarkovsky movie?
7 or 8, so that's why I had no idea what what the movie was about, but it was a special screening. I think it was somewhere just like Filmmakers Association, like and I don't know if they really thought I would understand something, or it was hard to find a babysitter back then, so they took me to the movie, but I'm glad they did.
Incredible. Now how images, sometimes it doesn't take the intellect to understand it. It's actually on a deeper level that it needs to work in that way.
Yeah.
How do you do that on set, deciding the gut feeling? Do you have yourself checklists or references that you go back to understand, I think this is now going in the right direction?
You do. I mean, there are so many tools you can use nowadays. I still enjoy. First of all, I enjoy using stills and paintings as reference more than frame grab from a movie. And the main difference is that even like the stills and the paintings, they are made to be looked at for hours, where even if a movie still can have the same quality, sometimes most of the times it's made to work in conjunction with other images. So I usually go for stills as references, and I print them a lot on 4x6. And the reason for printing them this small is that I can, at the end of prep, I can put them in the binder and take that on set with me. Because a lot of times you find these amazing visuals, and sometimes they work for certain scenes, and there are probably 80% of them that don't work. And a lot of times we forget about those. And it's interesting on set when you're stuck, or when even if you know what a certain scene might be about, it's still nice to go back and circle through those visuals. Sometimes you get just a few visuals that will work for the entire project, but most of the times you're just piling up a big amount of imagery that you tend to forget if you leave them in an office on the wall.
It's so interesting. I never thought about that when you're doing like references, like from paintings and from pictures, that it's actually just meant as a single image. And basically you're trying to obviously create moving images and have images work next to each other. I mean, we see it in photo galleries and exhibitions sometimes. Is that something when you put together the pictures that you do you think about chronologically how they all, kind of work together?
Sometimes, or like certain themes, or every project is different. So I sometimes you just print certain moods or certain ideas, or like things that are not necessarily 100% a reference. I remember for Jojo, we went and we chose quite a lot of stills with children from World War II, and all of those were black and white. But the mood was so perfect that it became one of our main references.
Mm-hmm. I always see when lighting, as just from my small little wheel in the whole industry, when everything kind of works together, like the actors on the set, the lighting, the framing, and all suddenly it becomes like this one thing, and you feel like there's a connection of a singular emotion that's being portrayed, right? Is that
Yeah,
something that influenced your father being an actor, that you understood more about the craft, of learning how to use emotions, how to use it for your work?
I think so, and also the fact that he studied pantomime and he was more interested in communicating without words, and then in that scenario, light and music and they become way more important elements of communication.
Do you use music for yourself in figuring stuff
I,
out?
I I do sometimes. I mean, not as much as we used for The Harder They Fall, where music is such an important part for James, and because of that, it was part of the script. And he would reference for every meeting. He would reference for everything. Even watching dailies, he would reference music.
Yeah, yeah. Great. Well, thanks. Yeah, let's just jump into the pictures and have a look how it all kind of comes from theory to, to practice. So do you maybe just want to tell us what your thoughts were about the images, and then I'll kind of fill in.
It was very interesting from one of the earliest discussions we had about this project. I remember Paul bringing in the idea of using a larger format, and the idea was that Joaquin's character was working in a portrait studio, and it kind of evolved around the 4x5 camera that he would use, and we wanted to use a larger format for portraits mainly. And slowly, what was interesting about this whole project is that we were watching dailies projected, and in our mind, when we started, that we'll use probably 10% of 65 5 perf, and the rest will be 35. But watching dailies, every time a shot that was on 65 came on the screen, we realized like it looks way better and so much more interesting. So we very slowly switched to probably 90% using 65 and only 10% using 35. And I'm always interested about still photography. It's such a big part of my process. Like every time there's a camera in a scene, or there's a scene there, a portrait is being taken. It's like I couldn't be more happy, because it's like kind of both of my worlds joined together. And I remember actually taking a bunch of photos. Like the camera that Joaquin was using, it's actually one of my cameras. The Crown Graphic. And I remember taking a bunch of stills with that camera as well, for the stills that we end up using as props at one point. But also, it's like it was interesting. Like we worked with Joaquin just like to kind of learn how to load the film backs and all that, which is a totally different process than a regular camera.
It's great. It's just when I'm looking at the picture, when you attend these lightings, because obviously it's very artificially set, those kind of lights. When you, in general, light scenes, do you try to light the rooms, or are you really looking at trying to get each shot done separately?
It, in theory, like the way I started it was everything was done separately. And I think that's probably the best way to learn. But you realized how much more and how much more interesting it is to light the space itself. And of course sometimes you have to adjust for close-ups, but I think lighting the space itself somehow makes us having a more like, I don't know if it's a more natural approach, but it kind of forces you into that. It kind of forces you into observing more what the natural light is doing in a space, and try to get close to that, and find whatever the natural light is doing. Finding the interesting things that the natural light is doing. It's not necessarily, it's important at what time you observe it, and so on. But there are a lot of ideas that we can have from natural light, and try to replicate that, and then you can adjust a few things. But I feel that more and more I'm lighting the space, and it's a little strange. I mean, because I learned that's how I learned operating a camera. A lot of times I'm taking shortcuts because I know what I'm lighting for, and I'm lighting for what I'm framing, and I'm framing for what I'm lighting a lot of times. But what's great about having a big camera operator is that he becomes the person that grounds me or pushes me and says, like, it's like, we can move that light and I can give you a better shot. And then like that happens, and so on. It's such a collaborative process that
Isn't it interesting, especially when you go from lighting a room and then you kind of push into a close-up, that it all kind of reveals in the eye light? That if the room's set correctly, then suddenly the eye light kind of works well too. And if you start to adjust those things, often it just ends up being, I don't know, too many dots or whatever in the eye. Do you try with, so my question actually, so when you do close-ups, do you actually tend to relight them? Or is it just something that it didn't kind of adjust the light in the room actually for the close-up?
sometimes, I mean, it's one of another thing that happened with me was that after finishing film school, like, you have that idea that your phone will start ringing right away just because you have a diploma, and that actually never happens. And then for a few years, just because I wanted to do something to keep myself occupied, I started doing stills, and it wasn't great. They were like commercial stills, but what I really learned from that, even if it was a big one strobe with a softbox, it was a very interesting exercise because I was learning again to light things with one source, and you can do that very effectively, but you have to be careful where you place that. A lot of times, I think one of the biggest mistakes is like to turn on multiple lights, and like none of them are placed perfectly. That can show. I mean, I worked one time with a gaffer who was really great. Like, he was telling me, it's like the best light is the one you turn off. So, but I feel going back to the whole space and close-up idea, I think if your lights are placed perfectly, then you end up using minimal changes for the close-up. And I think it all boils down to how good is the key light, and how good is positioned, especially, because otherwise you're fighting certain shadows and trying to deal with those shadows by turning on other lights. And I think that can be a mistake sometimes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Cool. It's the camera you're talking about.
It's interesting. I mean, I bought that camera probably a few months before having the first meeting with Paul, and I bought it mainly because I wanted to learn more about tilt and shift and about camera movements on a large format, but I never thought it would become such a star in a movie.
That's a gorgeous image. Do you remember how you lit that?
It's amazingly, that was the real sun. we were on the boat, and it was like the last few minutes of sun, and it just happened. So we just rolled. I remember, I think we shot a bunch of takes with the sun being higher and in a different spot because the boat was turning. But it was one of those happy moments where the sun was actually doing the work. But it's also a lot of times it's a combination between the format and the lenses and the film stock or the DIT you're using and so on.
Yeah, but it takes that flexibility on set, right? To find something, to find those happy accidents, actually to find those accidents, right? And make them your own.
Yeah.
Is that something you look for in relighting too? That something different happens than you thought about and you kind of move off of those happy accidents?
Sure. I mean, those are the best. A lot of times you get like certain crazy reflections or certain things happen like that you never thought they will, and they become amazing. And like, I think it's a pity not to take advantage of those.
Is that something you discuss with your gaffer as well beforehand? This kind of flexibility and how to adjust for those things?
For sure. And a lot of times what is interesting about the whole process, because it's such a teamwork, a lot of times like you have to be open to suggestions and to things that other people are bringing to the project. And it's very interesting because it's like for the harder they fall, for example, like I tend to use small lights, and like I like Dido lights, for example. But the gaffer that I worked with, like he knew extremely well how to use big sources and big lights, and and you have to adapt, and you have to kind of bring your own thing, but also let the gaffer show you what he imagined. And it's a constant collaboration, and it's just like you have to make sure that everything you learned through prep, you relay that to your collaborators, and like keep a constant flow of images and references and ideas.
I mean, it's an amazing thing, right? That at the end of the day, obviously, we're talking about amazingly crafted people like yourself, but to be able to say it doesn't really matter if it's this or this source, or we do it like this or like this, because if the vision is in place, you can do so many ways how to get to that goal, right?
For sure, yeah.
How do you communicate that vision, or how do you find it for yourself so you can put it into words to communicate it?
I think a lot of the most important part of the process, I think, at least that's what it is for me, is camera tests. And a lot of times when you think of a camera test, you're thinking it's like, oh, we'll just try out 20, 30 different lenses and see where it goes and see what we like. But I think the more you test, and the more you test using as much of your whole crew, including the gaffer, including the key grip, including everybody, it's a learning process for everyone. And we like slowly start learning each other and learning what we like and what we hate, and learning different things of lighting or camera movements. And I think if you go through that process, then when you hit day one in production, like you already have a common knowledge of each other, and you can like hit the ground running and try to build from there. But I think it's like doing as many camera tests, because that's the first step where the crew kind of starts learning about everybody and about everything.
Can you walk us through the process? What those camera tests look like? Do you have art department there? How do you make them?
I mean, you can start fairly small, just for like choosing a format, for example, or just like choosing aspect ratio for certain projects if you're not sure what the canvas you want will be. And then they evolved, and they can have costumes, they can have sets, they can have everything. I think the more the better, because it's an amazing tool, and it helps everybody to go through a few camera tests, because it's like you can it's the moment where you can screw up everything and you can learn from it, where when you really start shooting, it's harder to do that.
Do you incorporate in those camera tests the makeup test as well, and wardrobe and backdrops?
I'm trying to keep them separately, and for example, one of the first tests might be just a lens test, and it can be exterior with nobody, just using um, the camera department for standings and all that, and then slowly it can grow and it can become a test that when you narrow down your lens set, you can see how those will react in certain lighting scenarios, and then you incorporate the lighting crew, and then slowly, I think you want to keep things separately. It's like, it's better than not doing any test, just to do one that has all, and that's about it. But I'm trying to do at least 4 or 5 before getting into makeup and costumes.
It really sounds like you take those tests, even if they're like said it's a technical test, they really are using them as well for the artistic and the creative part of the process for finding out what you're trying to do.
Yeah, because a lens and the right choice of lenses can help so much. It's a tool that, in my mind, is as important as lighting or camera movement. And when they work really well in conjunction to each other, then it's perfect.
Okay, I'm moving on. Number 4. It's just amazing faces. Is it something, because you mentioned inside you're going, happy accidents with the lighting for the exteriors? Do you try to move with the light as well? You can, or do you bring it?
A lot of times it's great to choose a location and to choose it based on the time of day. And then, of course, like back then we didn't, I think the sun path was a tool itself, and then you would go to a page with printed numbers and you'll kind of figure out where the sun will be. Like now it's so much easier using your phone, but you either see a location during scout and you remember at what time you saw it and you liked it, or you kind of try to anticipate what the sun will do throughout the day, and it's perfect. It's like lighting it, like if you choose it at the right time. A lot of times, like, I feel that that's what using natural light means. It doesn't mean like, okay, we won't turn on any light, but like whatever it is. I think it's like, if you plan accordingly, if you plan for being there at the right time, that's as important as lighting the whole scene.
Yeah, because you really feel how the balance works between the sun, the warmth, and the coolness, what's happening from the sky and things. As soon as you start to light it, it gets really tricky to keep the balance throughout,
Yeah.
Big surfaces to light. No? It's interesting, this play with backlights and kickers, how to separate people from it. Is that something you bring on if you're not finding to be able to separate them enough, or is it something that's within lighting rooms, because you're mentioning it?
You do, of course, but like a lot of times, like this is the perfect example. This is where the format works in your favor so much, because shooting on 65, it's pretty much the same area as a 645 still negative. Your normal lens is an 80, so it's such an interesting thing that happened to images from like field of view and separation and depth of field and all that. And that's why I think everything, the format, the lenses, and the lighting, they all work in conjunction for that.
Did you choose both sides to where the sun was going? Are we able to turn around the boats?
No, we were, and it's interesting because like I couldn't remember too many references, but one big reference for this was the Black Stallion. And I don't know if it was because we were all terrified about shooting on a moving boat, but like this was one of those examples. where like our inspiration came from one of the shots in the Black Stallion.
I have to ask a non-informative gaffer's question. What do you look for when you're looking at a lens to make a decision? Where do you look?
Well, a lot of things. Like sometimes you want to have a more vintage feel. You want fall off at the edges. You want there's so many things. Sometimes you want. It depends on the project. Sometimes you want the most pristine, sharp lenses you can get. There are so many interesting things, and that's why I love using all these stills cameras just to go through and like show a director like this is a lens from the 30s, this is a lens from the 50s, and so on, and you can find similarities and things that you're looking for in the still photography world. I think it's one way I always try to think about, and it might not but it might not pay off in the end, but it's definitely an interesting starting point. And it's like, if you think about where when the story is happening, then the first thing I usually go for is like, okay, what cameras were they using back then? What were the main still photography cameras? Because that will kind of tell you everything about lenses and about the stuff that was used in that era. And this was the perfect example. That's why shooting on a larger format film helped, I think.
Very interesting. Because for us, it's just about, do the lenses flare and where's the f-stop at? You want to shoot at.
Yeah.
It goes through. I mean, it makes total sense. When you go into...
There are so many more things, yeah.
With this picture 7, it's just gorgeous how the warm light kind of extends over into the cool exterior light. It keeps the same kind of a rhythm of, the fall of the line of the light. Are those happy accidents, or were those things that you visualize and then you find?
Kind of, and trying while you're lighting a space. I remember this room was so small, and the idea was to try to figure out something that won't have the light bounced all over the place, and just going more high contrast and trying to use this is the perfect example of like one key light placed in the right spot.
It really gets tricky, because when you look at the image, it's like there's almost the brightest thing in the image is like the reflection in the lampshade, and that just gives everything away. It's like with the eyes, right? So if you get that right, some of the other reflections work. It falls into place. Yeah, that's beautiful. Is top light something for you? You like to do just to give the actors a lot of freedom?
I do, and this was one of those amazing things that happened. Our gaffer Mike Bauman had some amazing made up LED panels, and back then they were just like unheard of. And because the boat had everything was metal, he designed these small plastic. I don't remember, like 4x2s, I think they were, with like ribbon inside and with giant magnets that will be basically put on the ceiling with magnets, and they're amazing.
The magnets have become a big thing now with all the lights getting lightweight. It's amazing. And in terms of colors, is it just daylight and tungsten? Because it looks like, do you kind of gel lights to get certain shifts in lights, or was it just?
It is a combination, and this was basically I don't remember the color temp that we had on the LEDs, but it was using through the windows, using the natural lights. Again, we were on the boat moving with this one.
Do you kind of figure out what you're going to do in grading afterwards before you start to shoot, from the LUT all the way to the end, or is it something you go along with?
You do. I mean, on film, it's a little bit different, because you, again, like going through tests and everything, but a huge advantage that we have now is that you can use a digital still camera, or even like a small digital camera, and you can either come up with a layout that will simulate the grade you want in your transfer, or you can because also the transfer now and the color setting that they can do, it's much more advanced, and you can do more like smaller adjustments compared to 10-15 years ago. And you can basically place your color temp on a digital camera and then give that to the lab as a reference. When you work digitally, that's why the collaboration with the DIT is so important, because I usually like to do a lot of live grade, sometimes from shot to shot, but you kind of come up with a certain look for a scene, and hopefully you start the scene with a wider shot. But that allows you to like, again, using the color science and the DIT is another really important tool, because he can bring up shadows or make an image more contrasty, or there are certain things you can do very easily now with the DIT tools, and using that in conjunction with your lenses and lighting and everything else.
Do you adjust a lot for, I mean, obviously not on 65 now, but with their digital work, do you adjust a lot from scene to scene? Like if you're saying you're starting with the master, figure it out?
Not the lot itself. I think the mainly the CDLs, which are basically you don't bake anything into the image, but the CDL files can be applied later in the DI, or definitely for dailies. But you do basically, starting from a certain lot, you do a bunch of corrections, and those can alter the shadows or the contrast or the highlights or the coloring, all of those.
Yeah, totally. No, it's Tombstones. Where did you shoot that movie?
This was in New York City.
Okay.
And it's such an interesting movie for me, because it was an amazing collaboration with Scott Frank, and it was I think the first time I actually used old anamorphic lenses on an Alexa. And I remember Scott Frank, the director, asked me if I ever shot something in New York, and I told him no, and he couldn't be more happy. He was like, "Oh no, it's great. Then you can come here and just walk the streets for a few weeks and take stills." And that was perfect, because we actually came up with so many ideas from that, because it's one thing, like and I can see it, like when I'm going back to Romania, I very rarely take any stills, but like anybody that travels there, I will take a lot of stills. It's always interesting when you see a space for the first time, or for the first time with different eyes. And we came up with so many great ideas from just like looking at my stills of like random things on the street. But what was really interesting, these were, if I remember correctly, the B series anamorphics, which were lenses from the 50s. And it's one of those that the movie was like, the action was in 1999, so you won't think that those work, but being so old, they kind of gave us the vintage look that we were looking for. And they're not as sharp as modern anamorphic lenses, so that worked in our advantage, shooting it digitally.
Was that a street light, or were you working?
No, it was an old-time 5K Fresnel in a small scissor lift, and this was one of those happy accidents. If I remember correctly, we lost a location, and this was right around the corner from an apartment we're shooting in, and we went there just to see if we can actually shoot this scene. It was a very small scene, but we went there and looked at it, and we realized a lot of times in a city, the biggest problem would be trying to figure out how to turn off street lights and if they're not in the right spot. And this was particularly interesting because there was like all the street lights on the left side of the frame that were off. And we realized we can actually, we used a small lift for another scene, and we're like, oh, maybe we can recreate that with the shadows from the trees. And those lights were actually there. It was just an amazing, happy accident. And by the way, like the location we lost for this location, it wasn't as great as this. Like a lot of times you have to go with the flow and like have faith that what you might discover, it might be even better than you planned for.
Isn't that interesting? No? The frustration of something not working out always stands in the way of actually a better idea.
Yeah, a lot of times.
And so I'm just going through them, showing this, what you were talking about, the feeling and the moods and spaces. A lot of original locations, right? And like
yeah,
like,
and I remember the biggest problem is that we chose all these amazing locations at the 13th or 14th floor. And we liked the view so much in so many of them, but then we realized we had so many night scenes. So we actually end up having, I think, 5 weeks of shooting only nights, which wasn't great. But I think there's something interesting to using real locations. There's a certain, you have certain restrictions that actually will push you into finding better solutions.
cool. Okay, yeah, I'll just jump on to Jojo. I found that movie so interesting because, I mean, obviously the whole scenario is so horrific, but there's this lightness obviously to it, and it has a lot to do with the perspective. But I also had the feeling that the playfulness that you found with the lighting and everything really helped to keep it a child, a child's view. So the harsh reality isn't that what we all knew what it was now afterwards.
I remember it was a really interesting moment when I think we're doing a camera test in the actual set, and I think I had only one data light set for, and like we were in the process of turning on different lights, and it was just one tiny light, and we're looking at it, and it's always interesting to just like turn on only one light and see, like going back to that idea to make sure it's placed in the perfect spot. But I remember Taika coming in and like he looked at the image. I was like, you do know, like you realize this is a comedy, right? So, but on the other hand, we spoke about it, and it was the main thing was trying to find the balance and just like not like create something that is not overlit, and something that is not too moody either, and like finding the balance for certain scenes, or like overall kind of try to figure out how to create that look. And because we wanted so much color saturation, you had to have a certain amount of light as well.
So it's interesting. So basically the whole trick was finding the right ratio between a bright and a dark exposure, or just in terms of setting the lights to find the right mood.
And again, this was one of those things that started with the format and the lenses, because we went back and forth from 239 to 185, and it was one of those that for 239 I was testing some anamorphic lenses, and for 185 I was testing sphericals, and it was one of those that all of us, we knew that 185 is better for the story, but every time we were going back from a 239 anamorphic shot, we thought we felt that we lost something. And this idea came from like, okay, how can we use anamorphic lenses for 185? And the easiest way to do it is you take a 2 times anamorphic lens, you get a 239 or even larger image, and then you crop it to 185. But if you're doing that, you're losing the most interesting part of the anamorphic, which is the fall off around the edges of the image, and not to mention that you lose a lot of resolution. So we had to come up with this crazy idea of using anamorphic and certain type of anamorphic lenses with minimal crop, and we found this Vantage 1.3 um, anamorphic lenses. They were made for creating a wide 239 image starting from a 16:9 format. But if you use the 1.3 starting from a 4:3 image, you actually get a 1.9, which is very close to 185, and it gives you all this amazing fall off. And a lot of times I remember struggling with it because the sharper were in the center, and then like you can start feeling the fall off as you would go to the edges. But it was such a big part from the look in the whole movie.
It's interesting listening to you talk about how you find things and how you work it. It seems like you really are able to create a space, a creative safe space that lets you create. How do you keep all the production madness out of that so you're able to focus? Because it comes down to feeling, know that it's there, no?
I think it's. I think it sounds better than actually it is, because a lot of times you're struggling, and a lot of times you're searching for an idea. It's hard to find, and you're right, between meetings and all the production stuff that tends to occupy most of your time. I think it's just being hopeful that the writing will reveal itself at one point. But it's also I find that it's quite amazing to have that, because it kind of gives you a reason to get out of the meetings and be done with the lists and schedules and all that, and retreat it in your little world where you're searching for the perfect tool.
Play with clouds a lot? Like you try to get the movement of clouds, or is trying to keep it stable?
No, this was quite amazing because we had the sun was going in and out. It's a lot of times it's like scary and tricky, especially when you're dealing with a location that's like so wide. And, there's no way of controlling the sun. But with all the tools nowadays, and the DIT is a very big part of it, because by adjusting highlights and contrast and adjusting the color from when the sun is in the cloud from when the sun is out, like you can match things quite well. And of course in the DI you have a lot more tools that you can use. But I think we're kind of passed by that moment where we have to, like, if you use the right tools, and of course there is a certain area that you cannot necessarily adjust, but most of the times you'll be able to match a shot where the sun is in the clouds, a shot where the sun is out.
I'll just go through it, and if there's anything particular that you have the feeling would be great to talk about, please let me know.
Sure.
Everybody who hasn't seen this movie has to see it. It's incredible. It's also, I sometimes have the feeling that the kicker, it makes it a little bit artificial as well. Like it takes the naturalism out, and sometimes that really helps to kind of, that's over the top a little bit. How about front light? Is that something you try to embrace?
A lot of times, and this was the best case scenario, because this was when he was opening the front door, and like this particular frame is when the door is open, so just like natural, a lot of, and I mean this was the set, but we had to replicate a lot of field light coming from outside the house. But this is the perfect scenario where if you know the lenses will work, you can get away with front light quite a lot. Like the fact that these lenses, they have a certain sharpness, but they tend to have everything kind of soft and nice in the same time. I think it made it work. Like if this would have been a sharp spherical lens, I don't know if it would have been as pleasant as this image.
That's great. Plus the top light, right? So you're always adding something with it as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
Mm. The references for JoJo, right? So is that something you put up for everybody to see, or is that something for you in the director and art department only?
This this was in my office, and I mean, a lot of times I will share those images with all the departments, but like I'm trying to organize them and just like to look at those every day just to get new ideas. And some of the things we used, some of the things were unfortunately they became just like distant ideas in the end. But um, that's why printing them this small and having them, because at the beginning of the shoot I'll take all these photos in a binder with me, and it's like everybody can go through them, like the DIT, the gaffer, and it's a really interesting, informative thing about the visual process.
Mm. So would you say like the vision, or what do you have in mind in terms of the mood and the feel? It ends up on one wall?
It does. I mean, like I'm trying to cover as many walls as possible sometimes, but yeah, I mean, sometimes are just like specific references for specific scenes. Sometimes are just modes and ideas and things like that. Some things will work for shadows. Some things will work for framing, and so on.
Thank you so much for sharing this. This is just an insight
Yeah,
we usually don't get. Your mind. It's true, there's a lot of walls to cover.
yeah, yeah.
Cool. Okay, so this is the movie, basically, The Harder You Fall, that's showing now at Kamermaj. How is that going? It's stylistically, it feels like such a different film that you've done from the other ones you've done in terms of the lightness, maybe I'd say, right?
I think the a lot of it, like a lot of it comes from the joyful collaboration with James, and how amazing he's on set, and like inspires everybody to be happy and, and do their best for the project. I remember when we first spoke about color, and he brought one of the main references, which was Kadir Nelson, and like his paintings are so, like the saturation is so great. I remember thinking about it, and like this was, I think, one of the first images that he showed us, and I thought about it, and I was like, oh, I hope I'm trying to, like, how do I do something that is different than Giorgio, because we had so much color saturation there. But it's a certain there are certain things that the genre itself, like a Western, will force you into, um, and from the lenses you choose to framing and to everything else. And of course, lighting is such a big part of the whole process, and of color saturation as well. Um, Slowly, I was, because these images were so great, but I had no idea how to come up with something that makes more sense for us, because as a painter you can do all sorts of things, and you can hide shadows, and you can make everything work, I think, in a different way than we do. So I was kind of struggling to find a similar color saturation image as a reference that will give us more ideas. And I have this rule that um, uh, every time I'm traveling, I will go to a local bookstore, and I'll buy a book, even if I know I can find it cheaper online. I'll buy it just to support them, because bookstores are so great. And this paid off, because I found this book that I had no idea about, and it's called Congo Tales by Peter Hankett, and it was the perfect reference for everything, and it had the color saturation that we're looking for. um, I think the book is about recreating popular tales, and I think it was photographed on large format, and it has quite a theatrical approach, which kind of worked for our story, and from everything from the color of the light to the certain shadows and light placements. This became one of our main main references. And I remember actually taking all these images, the paintings and the stills, and giving them to my DIT on set, and just trying to reference them as much as possible for most of our shots.
This work is so stunning. It's the first time I'm seeing it, because with the colors, what it's doing, it becomes such a strong element, right? For it's not only about the people and the faces. Just gorgeous.
Yeah.
This is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of, like, for example, this image, if you go back one, I think that became it gave us the idea to cool down the shadows a lot, because when you're seeing what's happening in the shaded part, and when you see how much blue, cyan blue is there, like that's what we did for the first time. And what we realized, because the costumes have so much blue in them, like they started popping, and everything was all of a sudden much more vibrant by doing that.
Oh, that's good. Top. So did the cyan affect the moonlights as well for you?
It did, but I mean, there were a bunch of sky panel 360s that were lighting that hill there.
Yeah.
And again, I think that like our CDL was helping with that, just like cooling the shadows as much as possible. You have that separation.
Was there? It's a hard contrast, right, towards the sky as well.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of times it's like finding the right balance between your fill light and bounce boards, and how much the camera can capture, and placing yourself in a safe spot and see how much you can adjust from there.
Yeah, totally. So again, it's this balancing, right, for you, between how mood it is and how much fill you give to change the mood, no?
Yeah.
It's interesting how the images change if you see the reference images first. You know where you come from to where it goes. Yeah.
This was like one of the like, if you go to the painting of the horse for Kadir, then we were actually trying to figure out how to place the horse on the tracks so it matches the reference as much as possible.
Oh yeah, exactly. Fantastic. Yeah, cool. That's the one. Well, thanks so much, Mihai, for doing this with us over here and joining in.
No problem.
I hope to
Thank
see you in
for
person.
having me. Me too. Me too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.